Hello, my name is Hannah Senff, and today I will be discussing the science of belonging, overcoming the loneliness epidemic. Picture this. You're invited to your best friend's house for a birthday party. You love this friend so much, so you wouldn't miss this party for the world. Problem is, you don't know a single other person invited. You walk in, and you're the odd one out. All eyes are on you. You try to play it cool, but deep down, you've never wanted to leave anywhere so fast before in your life. Has this scenario ever happened to you? Or something like it? In my experience, this is a perfect example of how every human being is hardwired for belonging and connection, and the adverse effects that arise when those needs aren't met. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, this phenomenon grew into what is now known as the science of belonging. Cross-cultural psychologist Mariana Pogosyan, at the beginning of one of her recent articles, states a leading philosophy that much of human behavior, thought, and emotion stems from our psychological need to belong. In psychologist Christopher Peterson's words, other people matter. This idea that independence can solve any issue is a fallacy, and idleness, in fact, can solve very little. Going back to our party example, this is a perfect demonstration of how every human being has a natural desire for belonging and community. And if loneliness and isolation overwhelm one's mind and are given too much power, several awful consequences come as results. So even from a young age, human beings hunger for connection within relationships. And if this innate need remains unmet, it continues to feed the modern epidemic of loneliness. Loneliness, which can be overcome through true belonging. Throughout the course of this speech, I'm going to be discussing belonging and loneliness. And to start, I'm going to concretely characterize some of these abstract ideas. From there, I'll be discussing my own journey in overcoming loneliness and my fight for true belonging. From there, we'll discuss addiction and the impact it has on health and well-being and what role loneliness has in addiction likelihood. From there, we will be discovering the true value of connection. And in current culture, many people advocate for independence and self-sufficiency. This thought process will be refuted and will lead to greater evidence for why we need relationships with others. At the end of all of this, I'm going to provide some tangible next steps for you so you can have a meaningful life filled with satisfying relationships. So to start, let's solidify some of the key elements in this argument. The first of which is belonging. Belonging, as defined by Merriam-Webster, is a close or intimate relationship. How many things in our lives can we honestly say are close or intimate? A lot of us, not very many. Swiss author and researcher Johann Hari shares that there was a recent study that asked Americans if they felt like they were no longer close to anyone. And 39% of people said that that described them, no longer close to anyone. Loneliness, on the other hand, is defined by Merriam-Webster as being cut off from others. For the sake of understanding, let's make a comparison. This comparison has helped put loneliness into understandable terms in my life, and I hope that it does the same for you. Loneliness is like a deserted island, standing in the middle of a raging sea with water splashing and thrashing up against its sand. It's isolated, alone, and it's taken advantage of. Over time, the island begins to morph and change into a completely different mass. Ever evolving and ever changing, the island isn't stagnant. Loneliness isn't stagnant either. Loneliness takes on new forms as time passes by. And when hardship comes upon the island, it is unable to resist the change that is forced upon it. The same is true with loneliness. It is alone. Similarly, in loneliness, many people believe that if they can hold their ground just long enough, maybe they'll prove that they don't need other people. But over time, these beliefs change them. Continuing, we're going to be referring back to these definitions of belonging and loneliness. So now my story. I have had to fight for my freedom. The first obstacle was overcoming loneliness. For so much of my life, loneliness and isolation felt like an easy out. Why would I need other people if they always forgot about me? I was on my own island, and I tricked myself into believing that this is what I needed in order to survive. And I was on the verge of a breakdown because of these emotions that were welling up inside of me. Johann Hari shared that your depression is not a malfunction, it's a signal. Your depression is a signal. It's almost like a check engine light in your car. It shows you that there's a deeper issue at hand. And that's what our emotions do. They show us that there's something else we need to deal with. I needed help, and I needed the truth. All of my friendships were at best shallow and at worst non-existent. My belief that I was alone quickly saturated every single area of my life. I realized that I had to be bold. Friendships weren't going to come to me by passively waiting around. So I had to face the bitter truth I was believing about myself in order to change this terminal cycle of loneliness and the hold that it had on my life. So I branched out and I finally fought. Loneliness is a thief. And I wanted to share my story so that this thief couldn't steal from me or anyone else. Belonging has been a hard journey, but it's worth the risk. And the bravery required of you won't be wasted. I now recognize the pain of these moments as beautiful, and they're my story. In addition to this, research proves that in several instances, the desire for unity and belonging lives deep inside of each person. This is the biggest question that I've asked myself throughout the course of my research. Is belonging a natural desire? I was excited and surprised to find out that the answer is, in fact, yes. I had the opportunity to ask this very question to my aunt, Dr. Tracy Bounier, who works as a psychologist and professor, and when asked the question of if belonging is a natural desire, she said, yes, absolutely. There is extensive empirical evidence for this. This question has an answer and solid research that backs it up. Belonging is a need. Johann Hari addressed in his TED Talk that every human being has natural psychological needs. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel that other people see you and value you, and you have to feel that you have a future that makes sense. This desire is not only innate, but it is a natural human need. We must have human connections and relationships in our lives. And without belonging, loneliness quickly creeps in, and several forms of substance abuse or addiction come as natural results. Interestingly, in this modern world, loneliness often leads directly to different forms of substance abuse or addiction. Loneliness increases addiction likelihood. In the 1980s, the first experiment was conducted to show the correlation between loneliness and addiction likelihood. Scientists later titled it Rat Park. And it began when scientists placed a group of rats in one cage and rats alone on their own in another. So there were two cages. Both cages were offered pure natural water or cocaine-laced water. The rats that were in the cage with others consistently chose the water that was pure. However, the rats that were on their own continued to choose the water laced with the drug. And this experiment showed scientists how loneliness quite literally kills. Years later, after examining the results of this experiment, Canadian psychologist and scientist Bruce Alexander asks himself this question: who wouldn't drug themselves into oblivion, trapped in a tiny cage, alone and without stimulation? Addiction is the fruit of loneliness. Loneliness that comes from a deeper place with feelings of isolation, alienation, or lack of control. And based on the results of this experiment, in many ways it can be deduced that loneliness and addiction lead to a poverty of spirit And this poverty of spirit leads the victims to continue to reject relationship and constantly seek alternatives to fill the void that can only be satiated through true belonging. And this issue is alarmingly growing even in the lives of young children today. Tragically, technology corrupts the minds of many young children, setting them on a course towards isolation and even later in life, addiction. Many people undermine the significance of this relationship. However, it may prove to be more negative than we could have ever imagined. Psychiatric mental health nurse Julia Cook-Aaron highlights that as in other addictions, game addictions cause mental and social symptoms on the individual. Loneliness only continues as a natural result. Cook-Aaron conducted another experiment 2 years ago among fourth grade students, and these results continue to prove the depth of the relationship between mental instability and its relationship with technology. Naturally, the social development of the children who widely used the internet and spent this time with computer games shows that the self-confidence of these children was low, whereas their social anxiety and aggression behavior were found to be quite high. Professionals and parents alike can agree on the impacts that technology have on the human brain. And research proves that computer games caused aggression in children and adolescents. This aggression breaks connection, leaving children more alone as a result. Isolation and loneliness are only natural consequences when this aggression breaks connection. In the lives of even young children, author Johann Hari's research shows that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's human connection. Connection can cure loneliness at its core. Undoubtedly, the Bible shows several ways that in intentional relationships, it holds the power to eradicate any form of loneliness or isolation. We know that within every person there lies an innate desire to belong, and this is seen evidently even before birth. In the Christian worldview, this is based off of our relationship with God and also his relationship within the Trinity. He models for us what community should look like. And the best example of what he has and how he wants to share that with us is seen in John 17:22, It says, "I have given them the glory you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one." The Trinity is our perfect model for community. God wants to share this with us, and we know that community is something that God loves. And it says in Psalm 133, how good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in harmony. God's design for relationship is centered out of the community he has within himself. He wants to give us the best things, and we know that he has that within the Trinity. In John Mark Comer's book, My Name is Hope, he says that Jesus built us to do life together, not in isolation. And this is biologically specific to humans. We are made to do life together. So regarding belonging, there are few other examples than a healthy family unit that demonstrate God's design for intentional community. And this sense of community is essential to our very being, and without it, we suffer. The impact that a strong nuclear family has on physical health proves quite obvious. Renowned clinical and psychological scientist Edith Chen proved that emerging data suggests that during childhood, close family relationships can ameliorate the impact that adversity has on lifespan physical health. Naturally, Chen also shares that in turn, close family relationships in childhood operate via a variety of pathways, such as by reducing the impact of childhood stressors and what they have on biological processes, and on health behaviors that in turn can shape physical health over a lifetime. Strong relational bonds within family can help your physical health. Meaningful connections at a young age can positively impact the course of the rest of your life. Belonging slowly begins to change our thought patterns and positively impact every relationship that comes as a result. Moreover, loneliness and lots of other unpleasant emotions in today's society directly correlate to friendships and how they form. Research shows many specific ways that relationships grow and mature, and the intentional vulnerability that's required is one of them. Beginning by examining the impact of friendships, spiritual teacher Andrew Cohen shares that friendships are voluntary relationships founded and sustained on reciprocated goodwill and mutual caring. Simply put, in my experience, friendship is the risk of being rejected solely for the purpose of relating. Communicating and expressing these raw emotions, even feelings of loneliness, sadness, frustration, they make relationships stronger and sweeter. Psychologist Tracy Bounier says that in regards to unpleasant emotions, these feelings are important and valuable and give us much more appreciation for social connection and belonging. And so many of us are realizing that now more than ever in the craziness of this social distancing world. We need relationships with other people, and without them, we suffer. We're realizing that now more than ever. We need our friends, we need our family, and we need community. Relationships lead to belonging, and belonging has much research that backs it up, and it requires emotional vulnerability in order to flourish. In an era of self-help, self-sufficiency and independence are promoted as viable antidotes to loneliness. However, this belief system slowly breaks down because we were made to need other people. So just as before, I'm going to begin by examining some of the definitions of these things: belonging, independence, and self-sufficiency. The dictionary defines self-sufficiency as being able to supply one's own or its own needs without external assistance. Similarly, dictionary.com defines independence as freedom from the control, influence, support, aid, or the like of others. The popular belief that independence produces greater resiliency slowly reveals that over time, its efforts fail. People who adopt independence slowly develop a lone wolf mentality that impacts decision-making, outlook, and relationships. This belief system slowly breaks down, leaving the victims even more susceptible than before to the loneliness or other unpleasant emotions such as depression and anxiety that can follow. Loneliness can't cure loneliness. And while these ideals may seem beneficial, many issues come up in contrast. Independence and self-sufficiency are advocated as the answers to a brighter tomorrow. However, the answer is in fact belonging. There are several proven antidotes to this loneliness epidemic. Scientific data, in conjunction with my personal experience, refute this idea that independence is best. You are worthy of belonging. So take the time, make an effort to overcome these beliefs that are keeping you isolated. This fight for rawness, authenticity, and vulnerability is hard, but you'll have better relationships and you'll be able to cure the emptiness that manifests itself in depression, addiction, and self-sufficiency. You will have a deeper community and a truer sense of your belonging, and it will be worth it. Sharing my story with you today was overwhelming, but now I'm walking in the freedom that belonging brings. So take a risk and share your story with someone. Be honest. You may find that other people can relate in a very personal way. And in its brokenness and frailty, our journeys for belonging are a part of the human experience and are evidence of the power of the gospel. Jesus shares your pain, Jesus shares your struggle, and Jesus shares your heartache. He brought the cure for loneliness, and he says that you belong.
Thank you, Hannah. I have a few questions for you. Do you think that with the improvement of technology and social media, that this loneliness will increase in people who use the new technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was if the advancement in technology will benefit loneliness or will increase loneliness or stop it. And I believe that there's nothing that can truly encourage belonging more than interpersonal relationships. I think that technology, like while it seems like a quick answer, it doesn't really fill the belonging that you have deep inside of you.
Thank you. How do you think the isolation of everyone because of the coronavirus and quarantine will affect individuals and also society as a whole?
Yeah, the question was what I believe the impacts of the coronavirus will have on loneliness and belonging in that relationship. So I believe that this pandemic is going to be more harmful than we could have ever imagined, and it's going to leave people alone and wanting relationships. And there actually has been a lot of evidence that addiction has grown over the course of just this pandemic, and it scares me to believe that other people might not have the relationships they need in order to get through this. And I'm scared that it might create more problems later. So,
thank you. Do you think the Bible supports the idea that belonging is a natural desire?
I didn't research that very much, but I would say based on what the Bible says, I think that feels true. Even looking back at Genesis, we were made to have relationships.
Okay. The next question is, loneliness looks different for different people. How do you think this makes loneliness harder to combat?
Yeah, the question was, loneliness looks different for a lot of other people, but how can we actually combat loneliness even while it is difficult for people? Is that correct?
Correct.
I would say that while loneliness looks different for a lot of people, I believe that relationships with others can be a really quick answer. And maybe that it doesn't work for every person. I think it's worth giving it a shot because I know it's helped me and I know it's helped a lot of my friends and family. So just give friendships and community a shot is what I'd say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.